He had always preferred mornings. Not because he liked the quiet, but because the city hadn't yet made up its mind about the day. It was the only time things felt clean. Neutral. Like anything could happen. On this particular morning, the sky was overcast, low clouds curling between glass towers like they were trying to hide something. Andre stepped out of the parking garage, slung a weathered backpack over his shoulder, and crossed the street, walking with the same purposeful calm that had carried him through life ever since he stopped trying to prove himself. He didn't look like a man who could change someone's fortune. That was intentional. His clothes were functional, simple. His jacket had a faded stain near the collar. His shoes had clearly seen miles. His expression was unreadable. Most people looked past him in lobbies like this one, where polished floors and tall glass walls were designed not just for light, but intimidation. Wealth had its own architecture, and it wasn't built for people like him. He stepped through the doors of Crane and Barlow Capital, a boutique investment firm known for its exclusivity. The receptionist barely glanced up before going back to her screen. Everything about her posture said she had made her judgment. He waited. Not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. There was something instructive in watching how people behaved when they thought you needed something from them. The office buzzed with the quiet choreography of entitlement. Young men in tailored suits adjusted their watches more than their spreadsheets. Assistants clicked between screens, practicing the neutral tones of corporate dismissal. Andre moved through it like a ghost, there, but not seen. It was a space he knew well. Not this one specifically, but the rhythm of it. He had been underestimated in dozens of rooms just like this. And each time it had made his next move even easier. He reached the reception desk and stated his business. The woman behind the counter gave a smile so thin it almost cracked. She checked a list that meant nothing and informed him with the confidence of someone used to saying no that there must have been a mistake. They didn't take walk-ins. They worked by referral only. And even if there had been a mix-up, they weren't taking on new clients right now. It wasn't a rejection, rejections implied effort. This was something else. A brushing off. A quiet assumption that he didn't belong. Andre didn't protest. He didn't name-drop or wave credentials. He simply waited, standing there while she continued typing, hoping the problem would go away. Behind her, two junior associates emerged from a side office, laughing about something they had just read on their phones. One glanced at Andre and rolled his eyes, murmuring something to the other. A joke. A judgment. Nothing new. Upstairs, a meeting had just ended. One of the firm's senior analysts was scrolling through emails when she saw the name. Her eyes widened slightly. She double-checked. Then again. She had only heard the name a few times in her career, always in the context of rapid capital movement, anonymous deals, real estate consortiums that shifted property values like ocean currents. The name wasn't in the press. It wasn't on LinkedIn. But people in certain circles knew what it meant. If Andre Reed showed up, it wasn't by accident. The message was sent down quietly. And by the time the receptionist realized who she was speaking to, he had already been dismissed. That was how it always went. The outer office kept up its polished rhythm. Coffee carts arrived. Consultants chatted in corners. Elevator doors opened and closed. Time moved on. But something had shifted. A name had been remembered too late. A silence had begun to form where confidence had been. And in that silence, questions started to rise. Andre stepped back onto the street a few minutes later. The clouds had started to lift. The air felt sharper now, like something was waking up. He didn't walk fast. He didn't need to. The decision had already been made. He had seen enough. For years, people like them had said it without saying it. We don't work with people like you. Not in words, but in glances, in tones, in the way their hands hovered too long over the security call button, or how their smiles thinned when your name didn't come with a degree from the right school. But Andre had never needed their approval. He didn't build wealth to be accepted. He built it so that one day he could walk into places like this and choose what stayed standing. By evening, Elise had the paperwork ready. She didn't ask questions anymore. She had seen it before. Quiet man. Cold expression. A silence that said more than shouting ever could. Crane and Barlow would learn what that silence meant soon enough. But not today. Today they still thought they had control. Today they still believed they held the keys. Tomorrow they would find out someone else already owned the door. The office lights flickered to life before the sun had even risen. On the 24th floor of the building, while the city still slept, Elise sat alone in the firm's corner conference room. The documents were laid out across the table in precise columns. Acquisition contracts, property titles, stock summaries, and termination options. She had already signed her part the night before, as she always did, swift, discreet, efficient. Now all that remained was the final signature, and that would come soon. In another room across the city, Andre sipped coffee slowly, not because he was in a rush, but because he never rushed for anything anymore. The skyline spread out before him, shimmering under the early light like a kingdom built in glass and noise. He didn't look impressed. He had lived long enough above it all to know that elevation didn't mean anything. Some of the most powerful people he'd met had never stepped inside a penthouse. Some of the most ignorant lived in them. And today he was dealing with a place that had confused polish for wisdom. Crane and Barlow Capital was not large by Wall Street standards. It didn't need to be. It was nimble, selective, old money disguised in modern branding. They didn't advertise. They didn't pitch. Clients came through whispers, inheritance, or invitation. The firm had built a reputation on being the gatekeepers to wealth, and like all gatekeepers, they believed the gate gave them power. But they had forgotten one thing. Sometimes the man they turned away wasn't there to knock. He was there to see if the foundation was worth buying. That morning, as employees filtered into the building, nothing seemed different. The usual luxury cars glided into the underground garage. The same elevator music filled the lobby. Suits and heels passed reception without a glance. But upstairs, behind a door marked "Partners Only," the quiet buzz of tension began. It started with the managing director receiving an encrypted email at 7:13 a.m. The sender was a legal firm from Zurich, one used only by high-tier international clients. The subject line was brief: transfer of ownership, urgent final notice. He read it once, then again. He called his assistant. She didn't answer. He stood up. His hands shook just enough to be noticed. At 8:03 a.m., Elise entered the building through the service elevator. She carried nothing but a slim folder and a phone that buzzed once, then fell silent. The receptionist, the same woman who had dismissed Andre 2 days earlier, recognized her too late. Elise didn't stop to explain. She walked through security like she'd always belonged there and headed straight to the boardroom. By 9 a.m., the partners were all seated, 12 in total, each with tailored blazers, embossed portfolios, and faces that betrayed nothing but confusion. They were told the meeting was urgent. None of them knew why. Andre entered last. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't bring a team. He didn't bring a lawyer. Just himself, calm and unreadable. The same way he'd been when they first saw him. For several of them, the recognition hit immediately, expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm. For others, it took longer, the memory a slow drip until it landed hard. He didn't sit. He didn't speak right away. Elise handed him a single sheet of paper. He scanned it, nodded. Then finally he looked up. The silence was complete. Across from him sat men who had built careers on reading people, on predicting moves before they happened. But none of them had seen this coming, because they hadn't seen him. Not really. To them, he was background, a misplaced figure in a world of clean collars and curated resumes. They had dismissed him in seconds. And now he stood in front of them not as a client, not as an applicant, but as the new owner of their entire operation. Outside, the city moved on. Taxis honked. Emails flew. Coffee shops filled. But inside that boardroom, time froze around a single fact. Everything they thought they controlled no longer belonged to them. And it had happened quietly. No press release. No press conference. Just one man who had been told, once again, that he didn't belong, and who had calmly, methodically purchased the ground they stood on. The news spread slowly at first, like the ripple of a stone tossed into still water. Most employees didn't hear about the change directly. They felt it. The energy in the office shifted. Doors stayed closed longer. Senior partners whispered in corners where once they strode confidently. The head of HR canceled all afternoon meetings without explanation. A few of the junior analysts noticed their team leads checking their personal emails more often than usual. There were rumors, of course, but they felt too far-fetched to believe. Until they didn't. By midday, Crane and Barlow was a different place. Not in its structure, not in its branding, but in its temperature. The arrogance that had once filled the halls had thinned, replaced by a strange tension that clung to everyone who had laughed too loudly the day before. They remembered him now, the man in the hoodie, the man they had turned away without a second thought. They replayed that moment in their heads. The dismissal, the sneer, the way his presence had barely registered. And now, he owned everything. Andre didn't return that day. He didn't need to. Elise handled the transition with her usual precision. Department heads were briefed. Redundant positions were reviewed. More importantly, the company's investment strategies were quietly audited. Elise combed through past client interactions, flagged patterns of bias, noted which deals had been rejected for the wrong reasons. It wasn't about punishment. It was about exposure. Andre didn't want to destroy the firm. He wanted to know what it really was beneath the veneer. In the days that followed, the executive team tried to reorient themselves. They issued emails filled with cautious optimism, hinting at a strategic restructuring and exciting new leadership. But behind closed doors, the panic was real. Some sent out resumes. Others reached out to competitors, unsure if they still had value on the open market. One of the founders attempted to arrange a private meeting with Andre. He never received a response. Meanwhile, Andre moved silently through the city. He didn't chase headlines or publicize the acquisition. That had never been his style. He had spent years building influence by not being seen, by letting others underestimate him until it was too late to do anything about it. Crane and Barlow had been the latest, but they wouldn't be the last. He walked through neighborhoods where no one had ever heard of the firm, where real power meant access to community, not capital. He met with organizers, educators, business incubators, people who understood the value of financial tools but had been denied them. While the firm's former leadership clung to a shrinking vision of exclusivity, Andre was building something else entirely. A network where wealth didn't depend on how you looked when you walked through the door. Back in the office, the receptionist who had dismissed him sat at her desk, staring at the new sign in the lobby. It looked the same. The logo hadn't changed. But she knew better now. She remembered every word she had said to him, every sideways glance, every assumption that he couldn't possibly be someone who mattered. And now, each time the elevator opened, she braced herself for the possibility that he might walk through it again. Not because she feared him, but because she feared what he represented, the mirror he had held up to them all. Not everyone was quiet about the change. Some employees, especially younger ones, felt a cautious sense of hope. For years they had operated in a system that rewarded sameness and silenced dissent. Now they watched as someone who looked nothing like the old leadership walked past the glass walls of power. And that did something. It shifted their understanding of what was possible. Andre didn't address the staff. He didn't hold a town hall or send out a company-wide memo. His presence alone was the message. He walked through the building one afternoon in plain clothes, hands in his pockets, head nodding softly to the beat of music only he could hear. Those who saw him said nothing. They simply stepped aside. And he let them. Because now they knew. The fourth week came quietly. By then, the novelty of new ownership had faded from daily conversation, leaving behind something far more potent: curiosity. People at the firm began to watch more carefully. The meetings were shorter. The memos tighter. The expectations sharper. There was no grand gesture from Andre, no sweeping office renovations or mass firings. He didn't believe in drama for the sake of optics. What he believed in was structure, accountability, transparency. And these things were introduced slowly, like new light creeping through old windows. Each department underwent internal audits, not just financial, but ethical. Elise led them with clinical grace, her team reviewing client interactions, hiring patterns, internal promotion data. What they found wasn't criminal, but it was damning. A trail of missed opportunities, unspoken biases, quiet rejections cloaked in professional language. There had been patterns. People of color turned away for not being the right fit, women passed over for client-facing roles because they didn't have the right demeanor. It was systemic, subtle, and consistent. No one had thought to question it because no one had been made to. Until now. Andre read the reports in silence. He didn't scribble notes or send angry follow-ups. He simply highlighted key lines, marked names, and passed the documents to Elise with single-word comments. Review. Flag. Pause. He wasn't looking for vengeance. He was looking for rot. Outside the firm, word was spreading. Not just that Crane and Barlow had been acquired, but that something had shifted inside its walls. Small business owners who had once been quietly dismissed found their calls returned. Entrepreneurs from communities long overlooked suddenly found themselves invited to pitch meetings. Brokers who once considered the firm a fortress of elitism now saw signs of openness, even humility. The shift wasn't obvious, but it was happening. And it started at the top. Andre's presence within the company remained deliberate and rare. When he showed up, it was without warning, without announcement. One Tuesday morning, he appeared in the marketing department. A group of stunned analysts stood awkwardly around their desks, waiting for a presentation that never came. Instead, he asked questions, direct, personal, uncomfortably specific. He wanted to know who made decisions, who got listened to, who didn't. Then he left, leaving behind silence and reflection. In the weeks that followed, one of the firm's oldest clients, a generational wealth holder with a reputation for condescension, called the office in protest. He complained that the tone of communication had changed, that certain junior managers were getting too confident. He requested to speak with someone more appropriate. The call never made it past Elise. The client was informed, politely but firmly, that the firm no longer took tone policing as constructive feedback. 2 days later, the client transferred his portfolio elsewhere. No one tried to stop him. In the past, the loss would have been a crisis. Now it was a filter. Andre never mentioned the incident. He simply shifted the team's focus to a new initiative, one centered on supporting underserved markets. He called it Frontline Capital. It wasn't a side project. It was the future. The goal wasn't just to grow capital, but to grow access. And that required dismantling the quiet gatekeeping that had propped the firm up for years. Not everyone liked it. Some of the older staff resisted. One partner, privately furious, referred to the changes as charity dressed as disruption. A week later, he was offered a retirement package. He took it. Meanwhile, new talent emerged. Analysts who had been passed over began to flourish. Employees who had once muted themselves began speaking with purpose. For the first time, the firm's leadership meetings included people who didn't look or speak like the boardroom's traditional mold. The air changed. So did the expectations. And yet, through it all, Andre remained quiet. He didn't lecture. He didn't pose. He simply acted. Because he understood something they were still learning. Power doesn't announce itself. It walks in quietly. And stays. The 5th month marked a turning point, though few realized it at first. From the outside, Crane and Barlow still looked the same. The lobby still gleamed. The dress code still skewed formal. Clients still arrived in black cars and left with glossy packets of numbers and projections. But inside, a different foundation was being poured quietly, brick by brick. Andre had begun spending more time in the building, not in the boardroom or executive office, but elsewhere where decisions were shaped before they were spoken aloud. He sat in team huddles, stood at the back of planning sessions, watched without interrupting as analysts ran through their models and strategies. His silence made people nervous at first. They weren't sure if they were being evaluated, studied, tested. But over time, his presence became something else, stabilizing. His reputation no longer came from stories whispered across the office. It came from being there, listening, not needing to dominate a room to own it. One afternoon, he walked the floor with a notebook in hand. Not a tablet, not a phone. A simple leather-bound notebook that he flipped open as he moved through departments. Names were written down, not titles, just names. Not because he needed to remember them, but because they needed to see that he did. In the client strategy team, a young woman named Camila had been quietly running one of the most successful outreach initiatives the firm had seen in years. Before Andre's arrival, her work had been buried beneath middle management reluctance. Now it was funded, expanded, and publicly recognized in an industry newsletter. When her photo was published beside the headline, she cried in her car before going home, not because of the fame, but because someone had finally said yes without needing her to wear a mask. Andre never mentioned it. He just kept walking. In another department, 2 interns pitched an idea that had been casually dismissed months earlier. This time, Elise sat in on the meeting. The pitch was green, but the thinking was sharp. She offered them resources and mentorship. They were stunned. In the old regime, they had been little more than background noise. Now, they were contributors. Real ones. The change wasn't loud. It didn't trend online. But it was visible to those paying attention. Of course, not everyone was celebrating. There were still remnants of the old guard. People who missed the comfort of knowing exactly where they stood in the pecking order. They began to form subtle alliances, exchanging whispers in break rooms referencing the way things used to be. They weren't open about their discontent. That would have been too obvious. But they dragged their feet on new initiatives, questioned every policy adjustment, and quietly tried to outlast the transformation. Andre didn't fight them directly. He didn't need to. He understood resistance. It was just fear wearing a suit. And fear was always loudest before it collapsed. One day, during a quarterly meeting, Elise presented a graph showing the firm's performance metrics. They weren't just stable, they were up. Across all sectors. Especially in portfolios that had once been labeled unqualified. New partnerships were emerging from unexpected corners. Community banks, regional developers, even a few Fortune 500 executives who had grown tired of corporate sameness and were curious about a different way of doing business. Andre sat at the end of the table watching. The room was full, not just with bodies, but with belief. For the first time, this place felt like something he would have wanted to walk into years ago, not to buy, but to belong to. After the meeting, he stayed behind while the others filed out. The projector screen still glowed faintly on the wall. He looked at it for a moment, then closed his notebook. There were no speeches. No back-patting. No, I told you so. Because for him, this wasn't the finish line. It was the middle. A single step in a longer walk. That evening, as the city lights flickered on, he stood at the window of his office, not the executive suite, but a smaller space he had chosen near the center of the floor where he could feel the pulse of the company without needing to rise above it. The skyline stretched before him, brilliant and cold. He remembered the day they told him, "We don't work with people like you." He had smiled then. Not because it was funny, but because they had no idea how expensive that sentence would turn out to be. 6 months after the day he was turned away at reception, Andre returned to the building, not as a visitor, not even as an owner, but as a man finally ready to close the loop. It was a warm day, sunlight sliding across the glass facade like it belonged there. The city was in full bloom, both literally and figuratively. The firm, once encased in cold professionalism and quiet exclusion, had transformed. Not into something flashy or loud, but into something real. Human. The shift hadn't come through press releases or superficial rebranding. It had come one conversation at a time, one decision at a time, one face being recognized at a time. Andre didn't take the executive elevator. He never had. He entered through the main lobby like everyone else, his steps steady, his presence quiet but unmistakable. The same receptionist sat at the front desk, though she looked different now, quieter, more deliberate. She stood as he approached, not in fear, but in respect. Their eyes met for a moment, and she nodded once. He nodded back. There was nothing more to say. Upstairs, the office buzzed, not with tension, but with motion. There was life in the hallways, collaboration in the corners, laughter in the break rooms that didn't sound nervous. A group of interns presented a new fintech project to a mixed team of executives and young hires. A former assistant had just been promoted to lead a client development unit. The firm's latest partnership was with a startup founded by a black woman from the Bronx who had been denied funding by 3 other institutions. Here, she'd been given capital, office space, and mentorship. Andre passed by all of it like someone moving through a garden they had quietly tended for seasons. He didn't interrupt. He didn't linger. He just absorbed it. Later that afternoon, he sat in a small conference room, not one designed to impress, but one designed for focus. Elise was there, as always. She placed a folder in front of him, detailing upcoming expansions, new hires, fresh initiatives tied to communities the firm had previously ignored. She didn't read it aloud. He didn't ask her to. Instead, he opened it, flipped through a few pages, and paused at a photograph tucked into the back. It was from the staff retreat a few weeks ago. Not a PR photo. A candid one. People smiling, messy, human. No staged suits. No curated branding. Just a team. Andre held the photo for a long time, then slid it back into the folder. Outside the window, the sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the desk. The same city that had once taught him what exclusion felt like now quietly acknowledged what reclamation looked like. Not loud, not vengeful, just true. Before leaving for the evening, he stopped by the main floor and stood by the firm's mission plaque, recently updated, not by him, but by the team itself. The words had changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. From, "We invest in those who meet our standards," to, "We invest in those who move the world forward." No asterisk. No small print. Just a statement that finally included people like him. As he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city moved around him, hurrying, honking, living as always. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. This wasn't a victory parade. It was a return to balance. Because he had never wanted power for power's sake. He just wanted to make sure no one else was told what he had been told that day. We don't work with people like you. Not here. Not anymore.